Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Sweet Nothings podcast. My name is Kelly, if you're new here, if it's been a while, and this is your home of relaxed, funny, and informative chats all about the love of eating. We'll talk about the latest food trends, food news, sometimes overly controversial opinions, and all things edible in general, all the time. Today, folks, as the title may have already suggested, I want to talk about spice. I don't mean the thing that you need to put into your relationship after 4 or 5 years. I don't mean the kind of thing that burns your tongue when you want to feel like a macho man. I mean spices. The things we add to food to make them taste even better than they already are. And I don't just want to talk about them in general. I also want to talk about the specific scenario of if you had to choose just 2 spices, because one was too hard to be honest, if you could choose just 2 spices to carry with you in your kind of kitchen arsenal for the rest of your existence on this planet, what would those be? And some of your responses were very, very interesting. It took me a while to think about mine. Today I want to talk about that. But first, of course, we need to delve into just what on earth has been going on online, in kitchens, in the world of food over the last month and a bit since the last episode was published. And one that personally I have not been able to avoid in terms of trends has been this Dubai chocolate bar. Now, I think the first time I saw this was back in July, but all through August and all through the month of September as well, it has been just about everywhere. Not just people trying it, as in buying directly from Dubai itself, but also trying to remake this bar at home. I've seen people here in Italy bring in homemade versions to work for other people to try. And on the face of it, I get it, I'll be honest. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about here, I believe the first company to make this, or the first company to be doing this to the point that it went kind of viral, was a company known as Fix Dessert Chocolatier. Now, they are based in Dubai, and I believe they don't actually ship outside of Dubai, or they don't kind of do international deliveries. They're not all over the world. You can get it there and only there. And for whatever reason, their creation, this pistachio chocolate with that, now forgive my pronunciation here, I'm from Scotland, but I believe the pastry inside is called kataifi, I'm not sure. Anyway, essentially, it's a chocolate bar, milk chocolate shell filled with a combination of like a sweet pistachio paste or a sweet pistachio cream with smashed up phyllo pastry pieces. So you're talking creamy, melty, chocolatey, crunchy, crispy all at the same time. It looks fabulous. I can't lie. I'm a slut for all things pistachio, and I love a bit of texture in chocolate. I love chocolate full stop, as you probably have gathered by now. So I understand the appeal. And I tasted a kind of homemade version of this that a colleague made. And of course, it was gorgeous. It was wonderful. But I don't really know why this particular chocolate bar has gone as crazy famous and crazy viral as it has, but it has. And companies in the UK are making it. Companies in the US are making it. There have even been people getting scammed, being told that they're ordering the original bar from Dubai and either nothing is arriving or they're being charged like $20 per bar. It's ridiculous. However, it's everywhere, and it's still everywhere even a couple of months after the first time I saw it. So who knows? Who knows what illegal substances are going into these bars to make people want them so much. And the other big trend, the other big thing that has been all over social media related to the world of all things edible have been, thanks to the show that's called, I believe, The Crazy Lives of Mormon Wives or something like that, these Utah fizzy drinks, or these like Mormon sodas as they're being called. Now, forgive my lack of education on the subject, and I think we may have actually touched upon this in an episode previously in which a kind of coconut cream soda creation was going viral on TikTok. But if I'm not mistaken, within the Mormon faith, there are many who will not drink coffee, and they're also not permitted to, or it's kind of frowned upon to drink alcohol. So for that reason, they'll often come up with like very creative ways to have fun, enjoyable drinks, basically, you know, where some of us would get a hit from a sweet coffee drink or like a cocktail, they create these insane fizzy drink combinations. And you may be thinking, quite rightly, what is an insane fizzy drink combination? What are you talking about? You know, are they mixing Diet Coke and Sprite together? I wish they were. Some of them seem to keep it simple. They go to these like bars or these soda shops in which they will buy like a 40-ounce cup. Of course, half of that is then filled with ice, so it's not actually that much liquid. That will then be filled with, you know, maybe something simple like Dr. Pepper with a couple of pumps of vanilla syrup and coconut syrup. But there are some of these women who are going in and getting, you know, like a Diet Coke base and then adding fruit syrups, coconut syrups, caramel syrups, and then also adding coconut cream inside to create this just cauldron of cold, sweet liquid, and paying God knows how much for it. And of course, there have been people recreating these saying they're actually pretty good and they can understand how it would be an addictive thing for those who can't be addicted to other fun things like caffeine and alcohol. But truly, some of them are terrifying. The amount of, not even just the amount of sugar, but the amount of sweetness, you know, to actually be able to enjoy it is just insanity. Anyway, it's been all over TikTok, but other than that, a little bit of food news. Otherwise, as in some new products that have been popping up, mostly, as always, UK based, but also an international example I'll throw in. The Coca-Cola Oreo, and the Oreo Coca-Cola. Now, I'm having a stroke just reading this. But Coca-Cola released an Oreo flavored Coke. And Oreo released Oreos flavored with Coca-Cola. Now, I didn't get a chance to get my hands on either of these things, but from what I heard about this, you know, I mean, the first thing you think is that it's just an enormous cash grab, which, let's be serious, it is. There's no kind of artisanal craftsmanship going into the flavors here. But from the reviews I saw, the Coca-Cola with Oreo, which was kind of the more popular of the two products released as part of whatever this promotion was, is that it tasted like regular Coke with either a little bit of vanilla or a tiny like biscuity flavour afterwards. It was never going to taste like an Oreo. It was never going to taste like that. It was never going to have that dark sort of cocoa powdery flavour with a touch of salt in there. And the vanilla cream. It was never going to be that. But the packaging was pretty sexy. It was all very dark and, you know, either dark brown and white or like pure black and white. And I don't know, it just feels like an odd combination to have crept up, and it feels like something that appeared and disappeared very, very quickly also. And it's not one that seemed to receive kind of very many positive reviews, so I don't think it's something we'll see coming back or sticking around for much longer either. A couple of other interesting products that have come up that are very much kind of more UK focused, one of which is the Terry's milk chocolate. Now, Terry's are famous, quite rightly, for their chocolate orange. The chocolate that is packaged in segments shaped like an actual orange. You open the foil and you break off little segments and it tastes like chocolate and orange. It's delicious. It's one of the best chocolate creations, I think, of the last century, I have to say. It's not that it's of the highest quality, but the design, the gimmick of it, kind of the novelty, the flavor, its uniqueness, it's a perfect product. It's an absolutely perfect product. And it's so popular and has been so popular for decades for good reason. However, Terry's have since decided to release other versions. You know, you can now get a dark chocolate orange, a white chocolate orange. You can buy the segments that come with extra little kind of flavor things added, or they're like crispy, they have toffee pieces, other gimmicky novelty versions of the orange segments. But something they've released in the past couple of months truly does not make sense. They have released the chocolate orange without the orange flavouring. As in, it's still packaged exactly the same, it still looks exactly the same, except it just tastes of milk chocolate. And I don't know if this is something that anyone ever wanted or asked for. You know, if you want milk chocolate and you don't like the flavour of orange chocolate, your options are endless. Endless, and also much higher quality. You know, Terry's milk chocolate is not of the highest quality whatsoever, but you're buying it for the fun of the product and for that orange flavor, because they add a really nice kind of natural orange oil flavor to it. So the thought of someone being excited about the idea of this product just tasting of like regular, very basic, mid-quality milk chocolate is a bit mental to me, but it exists. Now, thanks. Don't think anyone needed it, but I guess we'll see if it sticks around or not. Something that is also very, very novelty that I am very intrigued by, though just as many people will be absolutely disgusted by, is that there has been released a Monster Munch pickled onion flavor mayonnaise now. Monster Munch pickled onion is a violent act. It is an assault on the senses if you're not the one eating it. If you're the one eating it, you're enjoying all of that tongue-tingling, mouth-watering, super savory, salty, sour pickled onion flavor, and it's gorgeous. However, if you're the one stuck on the bus or stuck in the kitchen or stuck in the staff room with someone eating a bag of pickled onion Monster Munch, it's horrendous. The smell is so violent. It is so aggressive. And I can completely understand why people hate it. But I'm a big fan of it. And they have released a mayonnaise with that flavoring in it. Now, upon thinking about it, have no idea what I would use said mayonnaise for, because the only thing I tend to use mayonnaise for is a dip for a very limited number of things and inside sandwiches. You'd have to get pretty creative with your sandwiches to come up with something for, some use for a pickled onion Monster Munch flavored mayonnaise. But I love the idea. The thought of that as an option at like a barbecue to put on a slightly or very charred, overcooked beef burger is just mind-blowing. I really, really, really want to see if I can get my hands on it next time I return to the UK, because, my God, it sounds like something I absolutely have to try. The other thing that really caught my eye, and this isn't as kind of famous, obviously, as Monster Munch, but there's a brand in the UK called All Things Butter that have recently launched into certain supermarkets a chocolate butter. Much like the Monster Munch mayo, I can only think of like a limited use or limited number of uses for such a product, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. We've seen chocolate flavored Philadelphia cream cheese, for example. But a chocolate butter is something that truly fascinated me, and I just wanted to share it in case it's something that you come across or something that you haven't come across and you'd like to seek it out, because they do have a website where you can order things from. They even have merch. So their actual butter products look good as well, but this chocolate one really caught my eye. So there you go. That's something that now exists. However, I feel like it is time to move on to the subject of the day. Let's spice things up. Let's talk about spices. I asked you guys what you would consider to be your two most ride or die spices, the ones that you could not live without. If you could only choose two to take with you forever, what would they be? I didn't ask why, but many of you also shared why, which I appreciate. So, spices in general. It came to mind because we're at the time of year where I'm already thinking more about cooking and more elaborate cooking and taking a bit more time with the food that I'm eating. In the summer, I tend to be very lazy and only want cold things and very easy things, because the heat here especially and the humidity just puts me off of the concept of cooking anything, really. So already I have more cooking and baking on the brain, and spices are a very important component of that for me, at least, and for many others as well. What are they? Because when I asked this question to you guys as, which spices you would take to your grave, essentially, many of you responded with just various seasonings in general, and also with herbs. And at least for today's episode, I would like to distinguish between those. So seasonings such as, salt being a mineral, I'll leave out. I wouldn't count that as something you would have to choose whether you wanted to take it with you or not. Similarly, herbs, whether they are fresh or dried, I will consider a separate factor and would probably like to do a whole episode on which couple or which singular herb you would use for the rest of your life, because mixing them in with spices just didn't feel right. Spices, as far as I understand, are kind of the seed or the root of a plant or of a thing, whereas herbs are like the leaves or the flowers or the stems. So let's keep them separate for now. Though I also understand the passion for herbs that came out when I asked this question. And spices are something that we have been using seemingly forever, for what I've understood. You know, we very famously as humans have used them for medicinal purposes for centuries upon centuries, some having, you know, seriously beneficial properties, others slightly less, some as treatments, some as kind of preventative methods. And we've also been using them culinarily for basically time immemorial, as far as I understand, because we like them. They're available in nature, they taste good, and typically things to the human palate that taste good in nature mean that there's something good in there for us too. And not only that, thanks to trade and thanks to globalization, nowadays they're used in just about every single cuisine on the planet. Some obviously more heavily than others, some actually very rarely. And some still are associated even to specific places, even if, as I said, trade and globalization has made that a whole different ball game. You can find anything anywhere nowadays, you know. And our specific point of view of spices, our experience with spices, where we're from, the culture that we live within, seems to entirely change our tolerance of them, our enjoyment of them, and even our perspective on what they are and their correct usage, which is fascinating, really. And you could see this even in just, you know, the small number of responses. Over 100 of you responded to the question I put out there. But even just in that small, globally speaking number, you can already see a contrast in where people are from and what they saw as an important spice, or what they saw as something that would be more useful than another, or something that would be more essential than another. And it's been fascinating, really. You know, and with this question comes the question of, are we someone who uses spices every day? Some people, yes, some people absolutely not. You know, for example, it surprised me a little bit how little spices are used in Italy, in both regional and in national cooking, national dishes, regional dishes here. Spices are not really something that are crucial to everyday cuisine, which is fascinating, especially considering the trade routes through Venice and through Rome all of these centuries ago. It's something that just hasn't really caught on. And obviously, you'd be getting also into a historian's discourse here by talking about why that is and why it wasn't kind of adopted into local cuisines. Were they too expensive? Did they not fit? Were they not necessary? But it's fascinating. You know, in the UK, for example, I've always considered the fact that we use spices very, very regularly to be a consequence of the fact that we have limited crops, you know, globally speaking, especially from a Scottish perspective. To make our tatties and neeps taste better, you want spices, you want seasoning, you want flavouring, because otherwise, my God, things are bland. It's also something that, you know, from my perspective, you see perhaps as something that younger generations use more than the older ones, because it's something that we're desperately crying out for. Whereas, you know, some people may be set into habits of eating, let's say, blander, less seasoned, less spiced food. For that also comes the question of, are we people who use more than one spice at a time? Some people have whole spice cabinets, have spice racks, have those beautiful tins with all of the toasted spice powders in there that they update very regularly. Some people have almost nothing. Some people will use maybe the occasional herb. They'll use, maybe at a push, some black pepper and some nutmeg. But the thought of using, cumin or cardamom or smoked paprika is like mind-blowing. What would I use this for? Oh, it's so strong. Oh, the smell is too strong for me. It's very, very interesting to see the differences between cooking styles with that. And of course, it then comes into question which ones pair well with others. This is where you get the idea of spice blends and spice mixes from, not just our own personal ones, but ones that have names, ones that have become a whole kind of separate spice within themselves. Things like za'atar and things like garam masala, which are already pre-mixed for savory cooking, and even things such as pumpkin pie spice for sweeter desserts as well, sweeter cooking. It's very interesting to look at them in that way too. And on that note, what do we perceive based on where we're from and on our habits, our interest, our culture? What do we perceive as a savory spice and as a sweet spice? Do we do that? Some cultures don't do that at all. Some divide it completely. If I say cinnamon or vanilla or even ground ginger, lots of people would associate that with sweet. They would associate it with autumnal, maybe even wintry baking. They think of gingerbread, they think of apple cakes, they think of carrot cakes, they think of biscuits, they think of all of these warming, cozy things laden with brown sugar. Whereas, other cultures think of them entirely as something you can use in every dish. Thai cooking uses cinnamon in a savory way that is gorgeous. So does Indian cooking. So does Southeast Asian cooking in general. It's interesting to see where and why that divide can come in. What do we associate with certain cuisines? Do we associate certain spices with certain flavors, with certain dishes, with certain cuisines, even if not correctly or accurately? One of the reasons I love the smell of ground cumin, for example, personally speaking, is because it makes me think of Indian restaurants, because that is where most of my experience with that particular spice comes from. Whereas cinnamon, I think of your kind of German style gingerbread or spiced ginger biscuits and things like that. Otherwise, even culturally based or geographically based, we can then associate certain spices with certain times of day or even certain times of the year. Cinnamon in American culture might be associated with autumn, for example. The same in the UK, we might associate it with, as I said, autumn or winter baking. You might think of it like pumpkin spice related stuff, or cinnamon rolls, or even your kind of seasonal novelty Starbucks drinks and things like that. Whereas you might see cardamom used in Scandinavian baking specifically in the winter and perhaps not in other months. Even certain times of day. Some cultures may view the idea of eating something heavily spiced first thing in the morning as bizarre, if they're used to eating sweeter things or very bland things first thing in the morning. It's, for something that is so globally available and so beloved by humans in general, it's fascinating to see how so many different perspectives can come from so many different angles. And that's part of why I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask what you guys would take, absolutely as your two spices. And I expected a range of answers, but there was definitely a group of spices that were far, far more popular than others. Some were incredibly interesting, would only mention kind of one or two times. Some, as a mix, which I'll also accept, because if you use it as just one thing, then a mix, why not? But let's talk about the ones that came up really, 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 really regularly in these responses. The first one of those was absolutely cinnamon. You guys could not live without cinnamon, whether in sweet or savory cooking. You guys said it was something that you would absolutely take as one of your two go-to spices. Whether that's in baking, whether that's just adding to things, adding to porridge or to, cakes or to, I don't know what you guys are adding it, even coffee, I guess some people might use it for, but it was a super, 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 super common answer, and I totally understand why. It's a flavor I've always loved. It's a flavor that is well beloved in my family and also seems to be one that people in the UK generally really like. Whereas here in Italy, for example, is something that is very divisive. A lot of people really hate the flavor of cinnamon here. And I don't know why. I find that very interesting because to me it's a very gentle spice. You know, it doesn't have a kind of strong licorice-like divisive flavor, but apparently so. Another perhaps obvious common answer was black pepper, because I think many of us are used to using it in just about everything. It adds a lovely subtle warmth without necessarily adding heat, though it can, to certain things, and it has this lovely kind of universally delicious flavor. There's very few things that black pepper would not go well with. You know, a lot of people see it as an extension of salt, you know, that those two are essential and everything else is just a bonus. And of course, not every culture sees it like that. Not every cuisine sees it like that, but it's the go-to spice. It's the go-to savory spice without a doubt. So that was no surprise to be seen as such a common answer. It was followed by ginger, both people saying fresh ginger and ground ginger, as something that can be used in sweet and savory, can be used in curries, you can use it to make teas, it can be added to salads, it can be added to, you know, the ground version can be added to baked goods, and it's delicious. It's a slightly more divisive flavor than cinnamon, also because it can come with that heat, but it's really, 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 really good. And it is very, very versatile as a spice. So it doesn't surprise me that that was up there too. Very, very happily, there was also a lot of mention of smoked paprika or smoked paprika. It's a spice that I just absolutely adore. It's so good for color, for flavor, for just perfuming foods as well, especially this, I mean, regular paprika too, but the smoked variety is just such a bomb of savory goodness. It goes so well with meat, with vegetables, in stews, in curries, in gravy, in just everything. I would add, it goes well with just about everything. I've even seen it used in desserts before, slightly more controversially, but absolutely no surprise that that was there. Also chili, you know, just a generic kind of chili was a very, very common answer because, of course, that covers a whole wealth of things, whether you're talking about, you know, smoky, flavorful, dried Mexican chilies or crazy hot Thai chilies or even just basic kind of chili flakes to add heat to something without too much flavor. We love it. For whatever reason that we like to torture ourselves with these things, we love it. And it's no surprise that it was there. Cumin was another popular answer. It's one that packs a lot of punch, even in a small dose. As I said, it's something that you see in a lot of South Asian cooking and also believe in African cooking as well. And it's gorgeous. It just adds such a unique and distinctive flavor. Again, mostly to, you know, vegetables or to sauces. It's just so rich and bold for such a small amount of stuff. And I'm getting hungry just thinking about it, to be honest. Cardamom was also a popular answer. It's something that isn't really one of my favorites, but I can absolutely see the appeal because, again, it's very, very versatile and yet very subtle. Much like cinnamon or like black pepper, it can be added as just a little kind of kiss, a little boost, a little extra to both sweet or salty things. And it's really, really popular in lots of different cuisines for that very reason. Vanilla, along similar lines, was very, very popular as an answer. And I'll be honest, it's one I didn't really consider as a spice in having this conversation. Because perhaps I think of it more as an ingredient, as a baker. But it's absolutely something that would count, to be honest. And again, while seen a bit less in savoury or salty foods, it's incredibly versatile. It goes well with so many things. In fact, it's almost a shame that it's seen as the kind of default flavor, as the kind of boring, basic flavor, because it is so delicious and, can be used for so many different things that I can absolutely understand why it was a very, very popular response too. Similarly, cayenne was a popular spice, much like chili. Garlic powder, whether it counts or not, was also a very popular response. I don't know if you would count that more as a seasoning, it's more of an ingredient, but it's something that a lot of people seem to be using. And similarly, there were a few people who responded with kind of mixes. So, for example, they couldn't live without curry, curry powders in their various forms, and similarly garam masala, so both of which being blends of different spices that you can just add without having to think about the quantities or the ratios of anything. And of course, delicious. I also use the mixes a lot because they're very convenient and usually they're made by people who are better at mixing spices than I am, so... So I'll allow those to count as your ride or die spices. A few people also said za'atar, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is like a Middle Eastern herb and spice mix together, which can be added, I think, more as a kind of, less like curry where it would be added, during the cooking. Za'atar can often be added afterwards, almost as like a garnish or a seasoning afterwards too. Very delicious though. And those were kind of the big popular ones there that lots and lots of people were talking about. Of course, there were also a few that were only mentioned 1 or 2 times, which is similarly interesting because it means that at least to a couple of people, these are also very important spices. One of those was ground coriander. Again, something that I think of as something that could be used as savoury or sweet, because you will also see it in a lot of kind of baked goods, in ginger cakes or in spiced biscuits and things like that. But also very good in South Asian dishes, in curries, etc. Similarly, mustard seeds were there for the same reason. Aniseed is one that I didn't expect, especially, it doesn't seem like something that lots of people would use on its own, perhaps like star anise. Maybe they're just a big fan of it. It's a flavour I don't love. I'm not into the kind of anise licorice flavour profile, so the thought of someone needing that as their go-to 1 or 2 spices is crazy to me, but you do you. Nutmeg was mentioned once or twice. Again, something that can be used in both sweet and salty. It's a classic in a lot of sauces, in a lot of, French cooking. Also, you'll see it in, for example, bechamel, but you'll also see it used in vanilla custards for the same reason. It goes very well with creamy flavors. It also goes nicely in kind of wintry dishes. It goes nicely into spiced baked things too. White pepper was something that came up alongside black pepper, but a bit less. There was also a couple of mentions of pink peppercorns as well, because they add still that kind of cozy warmth, but with a specific flavour profile to it. White pepper is a little bit underrated as well, because it doesn't kind of add the black speckles to food in the same way that black pepper does, which a lot of people appreciate, or people appreciate for certain dishes. A couple of mentions for some things that I had never even heard of before. For example, something that, and again, forgive my butchering of the pronunciation here, it's written like gochugaru, which is apparently a Korean chili powder, which has a very specific and unique flavour. Also something known as meat mita, which is apparently an Ethiopian seasoning mix that is utterly delicious, that I'd never heard of before, and now have a couple of new things that I would like to try. And also someone gave an honourable mention to MSG. Now, I don't know if we would count that as a spice, whether it's a seasoning or an ingredient, I don't really know, but I can also understand how someone couldn't live without that, because when you taste the difference in cooking with and without MSG, you notice the difference. You absolutely do. And all of those mentioned, I will throw in the 2 spices that I could not live without, being cinnamon and smoked paprika. Both on a lot of other people's kind of top 2 as well. Cinnamon, as a baker and just someone who loves the flavour of cinnamon in just about everything, I can't do without. Especially in the colder months, it's all I want. I don't get tired of it, whether it's in baked goods, in porridge, in hot drinks. even just the kind of violently cinnamon scented candles, oils, etc. that you can buy from like homeware places and stuff like that as well. Big fan. Absolutely love it. Always have done. Probably always will do. And smoked paprika, for exactly the reason I spoke about when we spoke about it earlier. It's so versatile. It's so delicious. It's so not salty, but so savory. It packs such a punch for such a small ingredient, and I use it in so many things, and I have no plans to stop doing so. And that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to get some inspiration from you guys, maybe give some inspiration to you guys from other people's opinions, other people's go-tos, that perhaps we hadn't thought about, perhaps we didn't consider to be essentials, but other people do. So thank you so much for your responses. Thank you for listening. I hope this has maybe given you some ideas of how, where, and when and why to use spices in cooking. I certainly can't wait to get cooking with more spices now that the colder weather is here. And yeah, honestly, this whole episode's made my mouth water more so than any recent ones have, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you guys again, as always, and I will see you for the next one.